Let's talk about window of implantation today. What is window of implantation? It is an interval during the menstrual cycle when developmentally competent embryo is permitted to attach to and ultimately invade into the endometrium. In our last video, we discussed the stages of embryo implantation. First stage was embryo apposition. Second was embryo adhesion. The third and final stage was embryo invasion. So when the competent embryo is ready to invade into the endometrium, so that period of menstrual cycle is known as window of implantation, when embryo can invade into the endometrium. So implantation involves two important things. One is the endometrial structure, how the endometrium is. That is as important as endometrial receptivity. So both these things are very important for implantation to happen. Endometrial structure, but a good structure endometrium should be a receptive endometrium too. These both are not synonymous. These both doesn't mean the same thing. I'll explain you how. Firstly, we should know what endometrial structure is. Endometrium is a mixture of glandular epithelial cells which are embedded in a mesenchymal stroma. So it is basically a bipartite structure. How bipartite architecture it has? Because it resembles a fruit cake. I'll show you. This is the fruitcake model of endometrium. Okay, so here the endometrium is shown and here the model is being shown. Here you can see these brown things. It is like brown cake, which means the mesenchymal stroma. As you can see, all this is mesenchymal stroma. Okay, and then there's a pieces of fruit which are actually epithelial glands. Then there is surface icing, and then there are efferent vessels. So these are the vessels. Why vessels are important? Because all the exogenous hormones, they arrive via these efferent vessels. Okay, and hormones are one which modulate the stromal cells, which can then produce paracrine factors, growth factors, cytokines, that all control the glandular proliferation and differentiation. So these efferent vessels, they are also the point of entry of exogenous immune and non-immune cells that become incorporated into the endometrial stroma in a cycle dependent manner. Okay, so then comes the glandular developmental arrest. Glandular developmental arrest means, firstly, because we have understood now you will be able to understand what glandular developmental arrest is. So the endometrial stroma, this brown one, the cake one, okay, the brown cake, endometrial stroma and the gland, which is more prone to damage is the endometrial glands. The endometrial stroma appears impervious to disruption, while the endometrial glands, they are highly sensitive to perturbations. Okay, so glandular developmental arrest is a marker of delayed endometrial development. Whenever anything happens to the glands, that leads to delayed window of implantation. So it is a gland which are more sensitive to all the problems which are happening, leading ultimately to delayed window of implantation. Another is the endometrial receptivity. So structure we have already discussed. Now is the endometrial receptivity. So synchronized interaction among ovarian hormones, growth factors, adhesion molecules, cytokines, lipid, these all allow embryo adhesion, invasion and ultimately placentation. So receptivity is also as important as what the structure is. So any perturbation in these two will lead to delay in window of implantation, or sometimes even the window will never open and implantation won't even happen. So what is now important? The important is embryo endometrial dyssynchrony. That is also one of the reasons of RIF. You are giving a good embryo. Okay, the embryo is very good. The topmost quality of blastocyst we are transferring. And the endometrium is also good. As we spoke just now, endometrial structure is also good. The glandular developmental arrest has also not happened. The endometrial receptivity is also good. Still, the patient is not getting pregnant. Still, the recurrent implantation failures are happened. Why they are happening? Because of the dyssynchrony. So that is what the most important factor which comes when the embryo is also good, endometrium is also good. Then what could be the possibility? The possibility might be the dyssynchrony between these both. Embryo might be in different stage of development, endometrium might be in different stage of development. There might not be synchrony among these both. That might lead to RIF. So window of endometrial receptivity should match with window of embryonic blastulation. As we all know, blastulation happens on day 5 or day 6. Day 5 or day 6 after, like when the for example, if we are taking the day of ovulation as day 0, so blastulation will happen from that day to day 5 or day 6. Okay, so dysynchrony, this might be due to premature progesterone rise. So premature progesterone rise will make the window of implantation earlier. The endometrium will open up that window of implantation earlier, but by that time the blastulation would not have happened. Okay, so premature progesterone rise, like we always see on the day of oocyte, when we give the trigger, on that day we check the progesterone levels. So if the progesterone comes high, we do not transfer in that cycle. Why we do not transfer in that cycle? Because the premature progesterone rise will shift the window of implantation. Ultimately we won't be able to transfer the embryo, because the blastulation will take its own time. It will take around day 5 to day 6, but endometrium is already matured, and it, because the window of implantation has shifted earlier because of the progesterone which has already rise. Second thing is delayed blastulation. As patient starts aging, anything more than 30, the blastulation becomes delayed. Sometimes even day 7, the blastulation, we won't be able to see the blastulation happening. So whenever there is delayed, whenever there is advanced age, there are chances of delayed blastulation. So window of implantation, it opens and it closed, but our embryo is still not ready. So these things lead to embryo endometrial dysynchrony, ultimately leading into RIF. The same thing I'm going to explain in this pictorial way. In natural cycles, what happen? Embryo endometrial synchrony is there. LH surge is happening, which will lead to rise in P4, okay, rise in progesterone. There is opening of window of endometrial receptivity along with window of embryonic blastulation. Okay, whenever this P4 is rising, the window of implantation is getting opened, and side by side the embryo is getting, blastulation is happening in the embryo. So it is reaching the stage of blastocyst. So during that cycle, both are coming in the same time. The embryo is also getting formed, and the endometrium is also getting receptive. So this is leading to ultimately implantation on day 5 or day 6. Okay, but in the cycles when we stimulate, like in IVF, obviously that we have to stimulate the ovaries. So unless and until we are doing the natural cycle IVF, so we are stimulating the ovaries. So in those cases, there are very high chances of embryo endometrial dysynchrony. Why? Because we are giving ovulation trigger, and there is faster and robust rise in progesterone. That leads to window of endometrial receptivity. It shifts by 16 to 24 hours before. Here you can see the endometrial, it has already opened. The WOI, it has already opened. The window of implantation is already opened, but our embryo is not yet prepared. Okay, especially if the patient is aged, the embryo is not yet prepared. Embryo is still on that day 3, day 4, but the window of implantation is already opened. So that's why if we suppose in these cases, if we do fresh transfer at this point, our embryo is not ready, but our endometrium is ready. So that will lead to implantation failure. So that's why in such cases, when the progesterone becomes high, we will have to freeze the embryo. And the concept of ERA is endometrial receptivity assay. That is also based on these concepts only. They check all those 238 genes are checked in endometrial receptivity assay, and it is checked whether the endometrium has opened or not, the window has opened or not, whether it has shifted prematurely or postmaturely. So all these things are checked in ERA, and it is one of the methods which we use in the patients with the RIF. So I hope this it is clear, like what endometrium structure is, what endometrial receptivity is, and what endometrial dysynchrony is. Thank you.